Bedtime Reading. Robinson Crusoe. Chapter 1. I Leave England. I was born in 1632 in the English city of York. I came from a good family who were from Holland. My father was a Dutch merchant who left Holland when he was young. His business did very well in England. First he worked in the city of Hull, and then in York. In York he met and married my mother. Before she married my father, her name was Miss Robinson, and I was named Robinson Crusoe after her. Unfortunately, the English people in York thought it was too difficult to pronounce our Dutch name, Crusoe, so they began to call our family Crusoe, and so today I am Robinson Crusoe. I was the third son of the family, but at the time my story begins, I was the only one left. My eldest brother was a soldier and was killed fighting the Spanish. My other brother disappeared. We do not know what happened to him. Although my father's business was doing well, I felt that the life of a merchant was not very interesting. I wanted to go to sea and have a life of adventure, sailing the oceans and exploring new countries. "Robinson, you can't go," my father cried when I told him my plans. "But, father, there is nothing for me to do here. I want to see the world," I said. "How can you say that there is nothing for you to do here?" my father replied. "You could go into trade, as I did, and look how well I have done." "Father, I am not good at business," I said. I didn't want to tell him that being a merchant was boring. "Robinson," said my father, "wait for a year. I'll do all I can to teach you how to be a good businessman. If, after 1 year, you still want to go to sea, I will let you go." It seemed as though he was begging me to stay. Perhaps he was afraid to lose another son. At that time I was 17 years old, young and full of energy. A year seemed like a long time to me, but I agreed to stay because I did not want to upset my father. During that year, I studied hard and tried to learn about business, but it was no use. Perhaps I was born with ocean water in my veins instead of blood. I simply had to go to sea. But after a year had passed, my father still would not let me go. Father was a quiet and serious man, and he had many strong opinions. He told me that life at sea was dangerous, and only for very poor or very rich men who were probably all crazy anyway. "It is likely," he said, "that if you go to sea you'll be drowned or a drunk man before a month is gone." My family was in a middle position, neither very poor nor very rich. My father thought this was the best kind of family to belong to. I decided to ask my mother for help. She was a wonderful woman and had always understood me. "Mother," I said, "I still want to go to sea. Please help me to convince Father that I'll be all right." She looked at me sternly.
"Robinson, you know what your father thinks of life at sea."
"Please, Mother," I cried. I was desperate. "Ask him to let me go for just 1 year. If after a year I don't like the life at sea, I'll come home and become the best businessman in the family. I promise." Mother looked at me for a moment.
"Robinson,"
she said,
"I will tell your father what you have told me, but you must understand that I cannot change his mind."
Mother went and spoke to Father, but he still would not let me go. 3 weeks after this, my 19th birthday came. Just after this, I decided to go to the city of Hull for a few days. I wanted to get away from my life of business in York. I sat by the town's harbor, watching the ships go out to sea. The ocean shone brightly in the golden sunlight. How I wished I could have been one of the sailors. I dreamed of standing at the front of a ship, feeling the wind on my face as we traveled to strange and mysterious lands. It seemed it would never happen now. I was feeling sadder than ever when a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Why, it's Robinson Crusoe! What are you doing here in Hull?" I looked around and saw Tom Bentley, an old friend of mine, standing before me. "Tom," I said, jumping up to shake his hand, "how are you?" "I'm better, Robinson, now that we've met," he said. "We should celebrate our meeting with a glass of beer. Come on, there's an inn over there," I said. "Unfortunately, I can't," said Tom. "I'm sailing to London on my father's ship." "Your father's ship? That sounds exciting," I said. Tom smiled. "Robinson, you should come with me. You look like you have nothing to do, and it won't cost any money. What do you say?" And so I wrote my father and mother a letter, telling them what I was about to do, and in September 1651 I left England to go to sea. Chapter 2. My First Days at Sea. Well, it wasn't long before I wished I had stayed on land. After only a few hours at sea, rain fell and the wind howled. The waves tossed the ship around like a toy. "Are you all right, Robinson?" Tom had to shout to be heard in the terrible wind. "No, I think I'm going to be sick," I cried. I had never had seasickness before, and I was miserable. "It's a punishment from God. I never should have disobeyed Father," I thought as I felt sicker and sicker. The weather got worse. The wind blew and thunder and lightning struck the water. I felt sure we were all going to die. "Please, God," I prayed, "if you save me, I'll go home to York and work hard at business with my father. I'll never step onto a ship again." Fortunately, the storm soon ended. Evening came, and the stars shone brightly in a clear sky. The wind stopped, and the water became calm. I slept deeply. The next morning it was a beautiful day. The water was a sparkling blue, and the sun shone. As we sailed into the south, I forgot all about my fears of the storm. I stood on the ship and watched the English coast pass us by, and I felt all the world was mine. I could go anywhere and do anything. Tom and I became friends with the rest of the men, and one of them offered us some rum. It wasn't long before we wanted another drink, then another. Soon we were all happily drunk and singing sea songs. A few days later, we were near the English city of Yarmouth. Looking at the clouds in the sky, we saw that we were heading into another storm, but I wasn't afraid. But this storm made the storm I saw on my first day at sea look like a soft, gentle rain. For days the storm went on. For days the waves rose high above us, throwing us this way and that. The thunder cracked, and great flashes of lightning lit up the sky. Because of the terrible wind and rain, we could not stay on the ship's deck for more than a few minutes. This time I was not the only one who was afraid. Even Tom looked terrified, and he had been sailing all his life. When one man said he had never seen a storm like this in his life, the others agreed with him. We were gathered in the crew's rooms below the deck. "I wonder how long this storm is going to last for," said one man. Just then there was a loud breaking sound, and water started to come into our cabin from a hole in the wall. "Get to the pumps! The water will drown us all!" someone cried. A few seconds later, I was pumping water as if my life was in danger, which, of course, it was. It seemed that the more water we tried to remove, the more water came through the hole in the ship. This was even worse than the storm. "Pump faster, boys, faster!" the captain shouted. But it became clear that the water was coming in faster than we could remove it. The captain went to his cabin and came back with some fireworks. In all that rain and wind, he was able to light one. We watched as the firework went up into the air. "Please, God," cried a man named Jeremiah, "let someone see our signals." It seemed that God wasn't going to answer Jeremiah's prayer. It looked like we were all about to die when someone shouted, "Look, a ship!" In the distance we saw a ship sailing along. "The storm is too terrible for them to send a boat to rescue us," the captain cried. But luckily for us, they did it. The men in the other ship sent one of their boats, and when it was beside our broken ship, we climbed into it. Tom's father was waiting for us when we arrived on land a few days later. After he had heard our exciting story, he said to me, "Robinson, I don't think you should go to sea again. It's a very hard life. If you do, you'll find nothing but disaster, disappointment, and who knows what else." He handed me some money. "Here, take this money and go back to York." Chapter 3. Captured. For some time I thought about returning to York. My short time at sea had been exciting, but I could easily have drowned in one of those storms. But I knew if I returned, my father would be angry and my friends would all laugh at me. So I decided to stay at sea, at least for some time. I left for London immediately. A few days after I arrived in London, I met some people who quickly became my friends. One of them was a ship's captain. He told me that he was about to sail for the far-off country of Guinea, on the coast of Africa. He wanted to do business with the Africans. "You should come with me," he said. I thought about sailing through storms like the ones I had experienced. "I don't know," I said. "You can travel for free," he went on. I thought about Tom's father's warning. What if I really was not supposed to be a merchant like my father? "There's good money to be made," he said. Well, that decided me. We sailed a few days later. It did not take long to reach Africa. We had a calm sea and a good wind the whole way. At our first stop, I spent some of my money on some African jewelry and other goods. Then, when we stopped at other places on the coast, I traded the jewelry for even better things. Then, I used those finer things to bargain for gold dust. By the time we sailed for England, I had more than 5 pounds of gold in my bag. When I returned to London, I sold that gold for 300 pounds. This was a lot of money. My father would have been proud of me. Maybe I was not so bad at doing business after all. Sadly, when we returned to England, my friend the captain became very sick and died.
"What are you going to do now, Robinson?"
his wife asked me at the funeral.
"Are you going to go back to York?"
I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm sailing back to Africa."
"What?"
she cried.
"You're going to risk all your money for another adventure?"
"Not all," I said. "I'm only taking 100 pounds with me. Will you keep my other 200 for me?"
"Certainly I will,"
she said. A week later I was back at sea. It felt wonderful. The weather was good, and soon we reached the Canary Islands near the northern African coast. One day, when we were near the King of Morocco's lands, the ship's watcher said, "I see a ship ahead of us." "That's no ordinary trading ship," cried one of the men. "That's a pirate ship." We tried to sail quickly to escape the ship, but it came toward us quickly. Soon it was so close that we could see the faces of the pirates clearly. "They're Turks," someone cried. Turks were dangerous, and we were afraid of them. Just as the man spoke, the pirates fired a cannon at our ship. We tried to shoot them with our few guns, but it was soon clear that the pirates were much stronger than we were. As they came up beside our ship, they ran aboard shouting. We could not stop them, and since we had few people and almost no weapons, we decided not to fight them. The pirates took control of our ship and sailed it to a place called Salé. "You boy, what's your name?" the Turkish captain said. He spoke very good English and pulled my hair so hard I thought it would fall out. "Robinson Crusoe," I said angrily. "You don't look like an ordinary sailor," he said. "I'm not a sailor, I'm a merchant." "Oh, no, you're not," said the pirate. He smiled. "You're my slave." And so the Turkish captain took me to his large, beautiful house by the sea, where I began to work for him. My new master made me work around the house, cleaning and sweeping. I did things that other people had always done for me. My life wasn't so bad. Although I was not free, my new master was usually kind and treated me well. I did not have to work in the fields all day, like other slaves. But there was never a time when I did not think about my freedom. One morning, when I had been in the Turk's house for a month, the captain came up to me while I was working in the garden. "We're going fishing, and we'll take that young Moroccan boy with us," he said. I had fished before, when I was a child. Sitting by a stream waiting for a fish to catch is a happy way to spend the day. But the Turk's way of fishing was very different. We traveled through the water in a little fishing boat. After about half an hour at sea, he told me and Shuri, the Moroccan boy, to start fishing. When we pulled our fishing lines in, there was a fish on every hook. Soon the bottom of the boat was full of fish. My master, Shuri, and I went fishing many times. Soon I became better at this kind of fishing than the Turk. One day, when I had been the Turk's slave for several months, we were out fishing when a thick gray fog suddenly appeared. The fog was so thick that I could hardly see Shuri and the Turk, who were sitting in the boat with me. For many hours we floated in the thick fog. When it finally disappeared, we were very far out at sea. It took us 2 hours to reach the Turk's house. "Well, Robinson," said the Turk, "the next time we go out fishing, we will take food and water with us, in case we are trapped in that fog again. We will also take guns. Who knows what sort of horrible sea monsters we might find? And if we see a passing bird, then we can shoot her for our dinner." Chapter 4. Escape from Slavery. One morning, when I was cleaning the house for what seemed like the 1,000th time, The Turk came to me and said, "Robinson, many important people will dine at my house tonight. I would like to serve them fish." "Will we take the boat out, sir?" I asked. "I am much too busy to think about fishing," he said, "so you and Shuri will go." I was always trying to find ways to escape the Turk, and I thought about my chances now. The Turk must have known what I was thinking, for he smiled and said, "If you would like to escape, Robinson, I am afraid you will have a very hard time trying. My head servant, Ishmael, will be with you." I knew Ishmael Amor very well. He was the most feared of the Turk's servants. I had listened to conversations about him, and I knew he was a very cruel man. I found Shuri, and the two of us went down to the water, where Ishmael was waiting for us. He seemed angry that he had to watch us. "You, boy, you untie the sails," he said to Shuri. "And you untie the rope," he said, pointing at me. "Sir, do we have food and drink with us?" I asked. "There's some on the boat already," he said. "But, sir, those are my masters," I said. Slowly I was getting an idea. Surely we would not dare to use his food and water. Ishmael looked even angrier, but he said, "You're right," and told me to find some supplies. By the time we began to sail, we had found many useful things besides food and water. We also found some guns and tools and also powder for shooting the guns. We traveled in the boat until I found a special place near the coast. I knew we would find no fish there. I pretended to be surprised when we drew up our lines and saw no fish there. "Sir, I am afraid we must go into deeper water if we want to please our master," I said. I was pretending to be as nice to him as possible. It was already afternoon when I threw my fishing lines into the water once again. After I did that, I slowly walked over and stood just behind Ishmael. I bent down very quietly, pretending to pick something up from the floor of the boat. As I stood up, I gave him a push, and he fell into the water with a loud noise. "You stupid fool!" Ishmael yelled. He swam to the boat slowly. "Here, help me get in." But by this time I had a gun in my hand. "If you touch this boat, I'll shoot," I said, pointing the gun at him. "You little worm! I'll have you killed for this." "Help me back in this boat, or you'll suffer for it," Ishmael shouted. I looked at Shuri, who was staring at me with his mouth open. I had always been such a good and quiet servant. He did not know what kind of man I was. "Are you with me?" I asked him. He nodded his head. "And do you promise to be loyal to me?" Again he nodded. "Well then, boy, we'll be leaving soon." "I can't swim!" Ishmael screamed from the water. "Don't worry, sir. It's not far to the shore. Well, goodbye," I said cheerfully. I knew that Ishmael would look to see which way we sailed. He thought we would sail north, toward Spain. Only a crazy man would sail south to the lands of the savages. These savages were men to be feared. When they saw you, they would capture you and cook you over a fire and eat you up, just as if you were a piece of meat. However, since I didn't want Ishmael to know where we were going, I sailed north until nighttime. Then I turned the boat and we sailed south, then east. We quickly sailed far away from Morocco. After 5 days, we found the beginning of a little river and sailed into it. Soon we put an anchor into the water and stopped to eat and rest. Shuri and I decided to stay in the boat until it was dark and then try to find some fresh water in the forest. But when darkness came, we heard many animals walking around. They were probably lions and tigers, so we decided to stay in the boat. When morning came, we were very thirsty. We did not know if there were any savages around, so we decided to leave the boat. We hid the boat as well as we could, and then went into the forest, carrying 2 water jars and 2 guns with us. I was afraid to go far from the boat, but Shuri was not. I watched as he disappeared into the forest. Suddenly, I heard a gunshot. A few moments later, Shuri came running towards me. I thought I would see a whole group of savages chasing him, but there was no one. When Shuri came close, I saw he had a large rabbit with him. "Look what I shot," he said proudly. "Good for you, boy. Did you find fresh water?" I was very happy when he said yes. He also told me he had seen no savages in the forest. I did not know exactly where we were. I thought we might be somewhere between Morocco and the green jungles of Africa in the south. We took as much fresh water as we could and sailed south on down the coast. We saw many beautiful places, but no people on their shores. So we sailed on down the coast of Africa, stopping only when we needed more fresh water. I wanted to reach the Cape Verde Islands before we ran out of food. Ships from Europe sometimes stopped there when they came from the countries of Guinea, East Indies, and Brazil. If we could find one of those ships, we might have more adventures. One day I was in the cabin when I heard Shuri shout, "Master, I see a ship with a sail." I rushed to the helm and saw a Portuguese ship. It was slowing down to let us catch up with it. I saw many smiling faces as we sailed up next to the ship. I explained to the Portuguese captain that I had just escaped from the Turks and told him my story. He liked us, so he took Shuri and me aboard his ship. Chapter 5. Life in Brazil. "Where are you traveling to, sir?" I asked the captain later that day. "I'm going to Brazil," he said. I wanted to pay him to take me with him, but he wouldn't take my money. He said that if he took my money, I would starve in Brazil, as it was a very rough country. "It wouldn't be good to starve a man I have just saved, would it?" he said to me. The Portuguese captain was a very kind man who offered to buy my boat when we reached Brazil. When I said he could decide the price, he said he would give me 80 pieces of silver coins for the boat. This was a very good price. He also wanted to buy Shuri. "He has been very loyal and helpful to me. He is a good servant," I said. "If I buy him from you, I will give him his freedom in 10 years' time if he becomes a Christian," he said. I told him I would talk to Shuri. Shuri agreed, so the captain and I shook hands and decided on a good price for Shuri. On the 1st of November, we arrived in Brazil. The captain bought all the boat's equipment as well, so I had plenty of money to live on. When I told my friend the captain about the 200 pounds I had in England, he told me I should send for some of it. "If you do not make money in Brazil, you will still have some when you return to London, whenever that is." I wrote a letter to the woman in London who had my money, asking her to send me half of the money. We agreed that when the captain reached London, he would take the letter to her. During my first days in Brazil, I stayed in the house of a plantation owner. We quickly became friends. This man taught me how to be a good planter. When I saw that planters in Brazil were very rich, I decided to become a planter also. I used some of my money to buy land, and I began to plant fruits and vegetables. My plantation was very far off in the country. It was so far from other houses that it seemed like I was on a deserted island living alone. For 2 years I grew just enough fruit and vegetables for myself, but little else. But by the 3rd year I had bought enough land to grow some sugar cane and tobacco. These were good crops, and I sold them for money. During those years I regretted selling Shuri. His help on my plantation would have been wonderful. By now, my friend, the Portuguese captain, had returned to Brazil. He brought me my money. Luckily, he also brought a servant to help me on the plantation. It seemed that the English lady had given him £5 because she was happy I was safe. With the money I had sent for, I bought a ship that I sold for a very good price. Now I had enough money to buy another slave and pay my servant some money as well. The next year was an excellent one. I grew very good tobacco, and my business grew a great deal. I was almost wealthy. One day, as I was walking around my property, I thought to myself that I could have made just as much money as in York, being a merchant with my father. And certainly, my life would not have been so dangerous. But I would not have had so much adventure. By now, I had been in Brazil for 4 years. I was very happy there. I spoke the language, which was Portuguese, and had made many friends. My friends were other planters and merchants who lived in the city of San Salvador by the ocean. When we ate together, I would tell them about my 2 trips to Guinea and the things I had seen there. They seemed very interested in these stories. One night, one friend asked me, "Robinson, is it as easy to trade as you say?" "Yes, it's very easy," I said. "First, you buy things like jewelry, toys, and knives in the coastal towns. Then when you go to other places, the natives will trade gold dust and ivory for your things. But the best things to trade," I whispered, "are enemies from other tribes that the people have captured. These enemies can be sold as slaves." The next morning, 3 of my friends came to see me. "We have a great idea, Robinson," one of them said after we had eaten lunch. "And what is that?" I asked. "We want to find a ship to sail to Guinea because you have been there and know the country well. We want you to lead the journey." "Do you want to trade for gold?" I said. My friend smiled. "Oh, no," he said. "We want slaves." "That's a dangerous thing to do," I said. "The kings of Spain and Portugal control the sale of slaves between Africa and South America. You couldn't sell them in Brazil without the authorities finding out. We'd be in a lot of trouble." "We don't want to sell them," my friend said. "We'll make them work on our plantations." "And what's in it for me?" I asked. "Well, 1/4 of the slaves you bring back will be yours." At this time, slaves in Brazil were very expensive, and I wanted to go very much. "I will go to Guinea on one condition. You must take care of my plantation while I'm gone." "We agree," they said. And so, on September 1st, 1659, exactly 8 years after I had first left England, I left Brazil to go to Guinea to find slaves. I did not know about the terrible disaster that would happen. There were 17 of us on the large ship. There was me, the captain and his servant, and 14 other men. The sun shone from a cloudless sky. It was very hot as we sailed northwards along the coast of Brazil. The beautiful weather continued until we reached the equator. But then it got much worse. The wind grew loud and the waves got high. Sadly, 2 people died during this storm. One man died of sickness, and a poor cabin boy fell into the water when an enormous wave hit the ship. He drowned immediately. By the time the storm had passed, our ship was so broken that the captain wanted to find some land and fix it. But when we looked at the map, I saw that all the people in this part of the world lived very far away. So we decided to head for the island of Barbados in the Caribbean Sea. There we would find people to help us, and the weather would be warm and beautiful. But once again there was a horrible storm. The terrible wind blew us very far westwards, in the opposite direction from Barbados. Early one morning one of the men shouted, "I see land!" We ran over to look. We could not tell if this land was an island or part of some country. We did not know whether there were people there or not, but we were so relieved to see land that we did not care. Suddenly there was a large noise, and with a loud and terrible crash, the ship ran into a huge rock in the water. Huge waves hit the ship, and many pieces of wood flew everywhere. The ship was broken and sinking, and it seemed certain that we would all die. Some of the men were able to find a small raft and throw it over the ship's side. We climbed into the raft and quickly tried to row towards the land. But as we neared the land, a giant wave crashed into the raft and threw us into the water. I sank down into the ocean, feeling the water crushing my lungs. I fought my way desperately to the top of the water. Just when I thought I would faint from the lack of air, my head reached the top and I breathed in air again. But again the waves crashed over me. They threw me into some sharp rocks so hard that I screamed in pain. I felt sure my whole body was broken. I knew I was going to die, but just then I felt my feet touch the bottom. Using all my strength, I stood up and saw that I was in water up to my shoulders. If I could get away from the rocks, the water would carry me to the beach just ahead. I filled my lungs with air again and started to swim, just as another wave carried me forward. A few moments later, I was lying on the warm sand of a little beach. I was cut by the rocks, and my body felt as if it had been smashed by sea monsters. But I was alive. Where was I? Chapter 6. The Island. For a while I lay on the sand, almost asleep. I kept thanking God for saving me. But when I finally stood up and walked along the beach, I almost wished I had drowned along with the rest of the men. The horror of my situation hit me. I had been saved, but I was alone. Everyone else was dead. I looked out to sea and saw the broken ship floating in the ocean. It seemed as if the giant waves would swallow it. "God," I said, "why did you save me? I will never survive here alone." My situation seemed hopeless. I was wet and had no other clothes with me. I had no food or drink, and I did not know whether I could find food or water on the island. As I looked around me, terrible ideas came into my head. Wild animals might attack me, or worse, savages might eat me. I had nothing to fight with. All I had in my pockets were a small knife, a pipe, and some old tobacco. By this time it was getting dark, and I had to find somewhere warm and dry to sleep. I decided to spend the night underneath a large tree that was nearby. I was extremely thirsty and hoped to find water. I had to have fresh water to drink, or I would certainly die. You can imagine how happy I was when I found a little stream of fresh water. I drank as much as I wanted, then I chewed some tobacco so I wouldn't be hungry. On my way back to the large tree, I cut myself a branch to use in case animals attacked me. Then I laid down in the warm sand under the tree. With all my fears of animals and savages, I didn't think I could sleep. But I was so tired that the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sun shone and the sea was a beautiful deep blue. When I looked out at the ocean, I saw that the sea had moved the ship onto the land. It hadn't sunk into the water. It had landed on the beach about 2 miles away from me. I walked along the beach towards the ship until my path was blocked by an inlet, which is a little body of water about half a mile wide. I returned to my tree to think about how to cross the inlet and get to the ship. Just after noon, I walked back to the inlet and found that the water was not deep. I could walk in the water to within 400 yards of the ship. I saw that it was not very broken. If we had only stayed on the ship, my friends would have been alive now. The thought that they had all drowned for no reason brought tears to my eyes. The sun had dried my clothes by now, so I took them off and swam over to the ship. When I got there, I saw that it was so high out of the water that I couldn't climb aboard without help. But as I swam around it, I saw a piece of rope hanging over the side. It was terribly hard work, but I was able to pull myself up using the rope. Once I was on the ship, I saw that although it was very wet, most of the ship's supplies were not damaged. Now I could eat. I filled my mouth with some biscuits and put as many as I could hold into my pockets. I drank some rum, which made my body feel better. I began to feel hope for the first time that I could survive in this place. The ship had a lot of food and supplies, which was lucky for me. But I knew that if there was another storm, the ship could be pulled out into the deep water again. I could not reach it there. I had to get as much food and supplies onto the island as I could while the good weather lasted. To do that, I had to build myself a raft. I found some pieces of wood, and after tying rope to each one so they wouldn't float away, threw them into the water. Then I jumped into the water and pulled them towards me. I tied together 4 of the pieces at both ends. Then I tied 3 or 4 shorter pieces of wood crosswise on top of them. I climbed onto my raft. I quickly realized that although the raft could carry me, it was not strong enough to carry anything else. So I had to climb back into the ship and begin to cut a spare board into 3 large pieces of wood. What hard work that was! When I tied these pieces to my raft, I saw that it was now large and strong enough to carry me and many supplies back to the beach. I put cheese, bread, rice, dried goat's meat, and some corn into some empty boxes, and then loaded them onto my raft. I was also happy to find some liquor. While I was putting the liquor into the boxes, I saw that the only clothes I had were now floating out to sea. So all I had in the world were the trousers I was wearing. Fortunately, I found some clothes in the men's rooms and took what I needed. Next, I found a toolbox. These tools would soon become more valuable to me than gold. I found 2 guns for shooting birds, 2 pistols, powder, and bullets. My raft now had food, tools, and weapons. But just as I was about to leave, I heard 2 loud meows. Looking around, I saw the ship's 2 cats. Smiling to myself, I picked them up and put them on the raft. Just as I was about to leave, I heard something splash into the water. It was the ship's dog. I was very glad to see him because he was a friendly animal and would be good company. Small waves carried the raft to the shore. I used a piece of mast as an oar and was able to take the raft into a little cove where I tied it up. From then on, the dog was with me until he died many years later. I did not see the ship's cats again for many months. As soon as we were on dry land, they ran away into the forest. Now that my supplies were safe, I wanted to explore the land and know what kind of place it was. First, I had to find a good place to build a shelter. As I looked around, I saw a hill about a mile away. I took a gun and walked towards it. I was very tired by the time I reached the hill, but I forced myself to climb up and look around. I saw no sign of human life. There were no fires or small houses or children playing. I was alone, with no other person close by for many, many miles. I went back to the raft and started to unload it, which took me the rest of the day. When night came, I made myself a little house from the chests and boards from the raft. I lay in the sand, wondering how I would live. I knew I would have to work very hard if I wanted to survive. I decided to return to the ship early the next morning, for the next storm that came might break it or drag it out into the ocean. I also decided not to rebuild the raft. Instead, I would swim out to the ship and make a new raft once again. The next morning, I took more tools and guns from the ship. I also took more clothes and a hammock for a bed. As I rowed back to shore, I worried that all my food had been eaten by wild animals while I was gone. That would be too terrible, for I did not know what else I would eat. When I arrived at my shelter, I did see a wild cat sniffing the food, but she ran off as soon as she saw me, then sat down and looked at me. I pointed my gun at her, but she didn't move. She looked hungry, so I threw her a biscuit. She ate it, and then looked at me as if to say, "Now give me some meat." But I could not give her any meat, and she ran off a moment later. I began to make a tent using some wooden poles and a sail from the ship. When it was ready, I put all the food inside it so it would be safe. Next, I made a wall from the empty boards and boxes for more protection from the wind and wild animals. I made a door from some other boards and spread out sheets for a bed. Then I had a meal of dried meat, cheese, and some corn. I was so hungry that it was like a feast. With 2 guns close by, I felt safe and soon fell asleep. When I woke up, I felt much better. I looked around me and laughed. I must have had more guns in that tent than anyone ever had. During the next few days, I swam back to the ship when the water was low. Using little rafts, I brought back many supplies. I took anything that I thought I could use now or in the future. After 5 or 6 trips, I thought I had taken everything the ship had, but then I found a great store of biscuits, rum, sugar, and flour. By the time I had been there for 13 days, I had been back to the ship 11 times. I had brought back every tool, piece of food, and weapon I found. There can't be anything else left, I thought as I went back for the 12th time. But on that trip, I discovered a large box that had some knives and forks. I also found many English and Brazilian coins. I can't use any of these things, I said, but I decided to take the things anyway. I had just gotten into the water when a strong wind began to blow. Quickly, I swam ashore. I soon reached my little tent. I lay there safe and warm and watched the storm. It lasted most of the night. Despite all the thunder and rain, I slept well. The next morning, when I looked out to sea, the ship had disappeared. You can imagine how relieved and happy I was. I had worked so hard to take everything useful from the ship, and I was rewarded for it. In the last 2 weeks, I had been so busy that I did not worry about being attacked by wild animals or savages. But I knew my little tent would not protect me, so I decided to move to a safer place. Should I look for a cave or build a stronger tent, I thought. Wherever I went, the water nearby must be fresh. It should offer shade from the sun and safety from animals or savages. I wanted to be able to see the ocean from my house in case I saw a passing ship. Soon, I found some flat ground that was near a large hill. This flat area was very large, so that if anything was coming, I would see it. There was a small hole in the hill. It looked like the entrance to a cave. On one of the sides, the hill ran down to the sea. I was on the other side, and so I would be protected from the sun's terrible heat each day. There was a very small cave in the hill. I decided to live there, on the flat ground in front of the cave. It was the best place to live that I had found on the island. Within a week, I had built a strong house made of wood poles I had cut from trees. There was a tent for my supplies, made from a sail from the ship, and a high, sharp fence to protect me from anything that might attack. I had food, guns, fresh water, and a good place to live, so I was happy. While I was building my house, I often stopped to go hunting. I was happy to find goats eating grass in the fields. At first, the goats were so fast it was difficult to shoot them. But if I was standing on the rocks above the fields, the goats did not see me, and I could kill one of them. The first goat I shot was a female goat that had a baby with her. When I picked up the older animal and carried her home on my shoulders, the baby goat followed me. I tried to feed the little animal so she would become friendly to me. If I tamed the baby, I could use her milk to make cheese later. But sadly, she would not eat, so I had to kill her for food. After my new home was built, I began to decorate it. I had never built furniture before, but I made myself a table and chair with some pieces of wood from my rafts and the tools from the ship. I also cut down more trees, and with that wood I made shelves along one side of my little cave to put my tools and guns on. During this time, I began to keep a record of what I did every day. I continued to do this until my ink started to run low. Chapter 7. Life on the Island Continues. When I was not adding little things to my new home, I was busy learning about the animals and plants on the island and about myself. I discovered that the birds that lived in holes in the rocks were good to eat. One day I found an old bag that I wanted to use to store things in. Some old corn fell out of this bag and made roots in the dirt. Soon, green barley grew from the seeds. When I saw these plants, I cried. They reminded me of England. When I was young, I wanted to leave England for a life of adventure at sea, but now that I was trapped alone, I only wanted to return. One day, when I was sitting by my little cave, I heard a terrible noise. The next moment, much dirt came falling down the hill. There was so much of it, I was afraid it would swallow me. I ran away and climbed over my fence using a ladder I had made. I realized that the island was being shaken by a terrible earthquake. The earthquake soon ended, but then a terrible storm began. The sea became black and violent and full of huge waves that crashed onto the beach. Thunder roared and lightning hit the water. The storm lasted for 3 hours, but when it finished, it began to rain. This was not the gentle, calm rain of England, but a rain so hard and terrible that I had to cut a hole in my fence to let the water pour out. Otherwise, my house would have been drowned, and me with it. I knew that if there were often earthquakes on the island, then it was not safe for me to live on the side of a hill. If I lived there, the shaking of the earth might cause rocks and dirt to fall on me. I decided I would build another small house in an open place. I would build a strong wall around it, like the one around my cave. I spent 2 days sharpening my tools, and then I was ready to look for a place to make a new house. On the first day of May, I was walking along the beach thinking about where to build my new house. That day I found the remains of the broken ship. The sea had brought them up to the beach. When the tide went out, I walked out to the broken ship. Then I had a good idea. I could use the remains of the ship to build my new house. In the following weeks, I took a lot of wood and metal from the ship. I stopped my work only to hunt and fish, so I would not be hungry. While I was living on the island, I ate many interesting animals. One day I caught a dolphin and dried the meat in the sun and ate it. Another day I caught a turtle and spent the next day cooking it. There were more than 50 eggs inside her. I think that animal gave me some of the best meals of my life. One day I spent a long time in the woods hunting birds to cook over a fire. By the time I went to the beach, the water had come in, and I could not reach the ship. I had taken so much wood from it that it looked like a skeleton. As always, I wrote everything I did each day in my journal. In late June, I became terribly sick. On June 18th, it had rained all day. I felt extremely cold, but I stayed outside working. The next day I woke up and felt terrible. My body shook as if it was the middle of winter. That night I had a fever. I felt so bad I thought I would die, but I felt a little better the next day. Unfortunately, my sickness continued. On June 22nd, I felt worse than ever. My head hurt as though it had been beaten with a stick. My body burned with fever. On June 25th, I realized that I had eaten nothing for days. Somehow, I found the strength to walk to where the goats ate grass. I shot one and dragged it home. It was terribly hard because I was so sick, but I had to eat. I cooked and ate the goat and fell asleep. The next day I was so weak I couldn't even get out of bed to stop my terrible thirst. I was so scared of death that I cried out, "God, I don't want to die alone here. God, please let me live." Then I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I thought I felt a little better. I drank some rum and water and ate some goat's meat and turtle's eggs. I tried to walk, but I was still weak, so I could only walk a few steps from my house. When I got back to my bed, I drank some more rum and then fell asleep. I didn't waken until the next afternoon, or perhaps the day after that. Whenever it was, I felt so much better that I thought God might have answered my call. The next day I was strong enough to hunt for food. I killed some seabirds and a duck of some kind. I continued to get better, but I was not completely strong until late July, the next month. How terribly sick I had been. I was so thankful to God for not letting me die that I began to read my Bible often. I also began to pray, asking Him to forgive me for my sins. I also asked God to help me leave the island one day. In July, I started to feel so well that I started to explore more of the island than ever before. By this time, I had been on the island for 3 months, but I had never gone very far from my house on the hill. By a stream of fresh water, I discovered more green fields where tobacco and wild sugar plants grew. These grew on my plantation in Brazil. Beyond the fields, there were woods. There I found melons and vines full of grapes. These fruits were very sweet and made a good meal. I spent the night in the woods, sleeping in the branches of a tree, in case wild animals came by at night. The next morning, I continued to walk until I found a place where the country became flat to the west. A little stream flowed through the fields, and the country was green and fresh. In the distance, I saw there were some trees, and I walked towards them. These trees were lime trees. I picked the limes and squeezed the juice into water as I walked. This was a delicious drink. I decided to gather lots of fruit before the rainy months, which would arrive soon. I picked many lemons, limes, and grapes from the fields and forests. I left these fruits in piles on the ground, hoping to return the next day and get them. But the next day I saw that much of the fruit had been crushed and eaten, probably by birds. I picked more grapes and hung them on branches to dry in the sun. These would last me for many months. When I arrived back at my house on the hill, my bags were full of lemons, limes, and grapes that were dried into raisins. I was as happy as a farmer when he looks at his harvest. I wanted to build a house in this beautiful area full of fruits, but it was too far away from the sea. If I built my house here, I would be telling myself that I would never leave the island. No passing ship would see my house there. But I did make a little garden of grapevines and lime trees. I built a fence around it to keep animals out. As I sat in the garden one day, I laughed at my thoughts. I now had a seaside house and a country house. I was just like the rich people in England. Soon, a hard rain began to fall every day. I had to return to my house by the ocean for shelter. It rained for 2 weeks, beginning on August 14th. I did not go out because it was too wet, except once when I killed a goat for food. I worked to make my storage area in my house bigger and filled it with dried meat and fruit. Soon it was so large that I made a door into it from outside my fence. Soon after this, one of the ship's cats came back with 3 kittens. This was a surprise because I had thought that both the ship's cats were female. Soon these kittens grew up and had more kittens. In a few years there were so many cats on the island that they were a problem. They were lovely cats, but they got into my food and ate it. I had to kill them as if they were rats. A few weeks later, the rain stopped. I realized that it was September 30th. I had been on my island for a year, and I had been able to live well. That day I did not eat anything. I decided that every seventh day in the week I would celebrate the Sabbath day and read my Bible. Chapter 8. I am always busy. I had now been on the island for 1 year. I knew that the year was divided into rainy and dry seasons. I could plant seeds at one time and gather the foods at another time. I decided to use my planting skills from Brazil to grow my own food. I planted the seeds of corn and rice that I had taken from the ship. Fortunately, I didn't plant all of those seeds. My first plants did not grow because I had planted them at the wrong time. I planted a second crop. These plants grew very well. They gave me plenty of new corn and rice. I was able to plant even more during the next seed time. As the years passed, I planted and gathered these foods 2 times a year. One day, when I returned to my garden, I found that the poles I had used to build a fence had grown many leaves like trees. Now there was enough shade for me to spend all the hot, dry days there. I taught myself how to make baskets from twigs that I cut and dried in the sun. These were very useful for holding fruit, corn, and rice. After so long on the island, I realized that because of my hard work, I had almost everything I needed to live well. I had been lucky to land on such a wonderful island. The only things I needed were some more bottles and some small pots to cook with. I also wanted a new pipe to smoke tobacco with. I did not know what I would use to make pots, bottles, and a pipe. There was nothing in my garden or my house to make these things, of course. So I decided to explore more of the island. I called my dog and, taking my gun, some dried meat, and a great bunch of grapes, I began to explore. I walked extremely far that day. I climbed up a hill and looked out at the ocean. I saw some land not far off. I had no idea who might live there. It could be owned by the Spanish or the home of savages. I deeply hoped it was Spanish land. Surely a ship would pass my island sooner or later. If savage peoples lived there, it was good that I lived where I was. If I had landed on their land, they would have had me for dinner. As I walked on, I found myself on a part of the island that was much more beautiful than my home. There were open, green fields filled with flowers and grass, and there was a great jungle filled with strong trees. Many parrots lived in the trees and flew from one to another. Their feathers were all the colors of the rainbow, and they made loud, cheerful noises. I was able to catch one and take it home. I thought I could teach it to speak to me. I arrived on the other side of the island and saw the beach there. This beach was covered with turtles and many more birds than the beach on my side of the island. Although this part of the island was much more beautiful, I did not want to move there. I had come to think of my house, my cave, and my garden as my home, and I did not want to move again. As we walked back home, my dog scared a young goat, and it ran in front of me. He was about to kill it when I stopped him. I had been thinking about trying to gather many tame goats and use their milk. I could also kill them easily when I needed meat. Here was a fine young male. If I could catch a young female goat, I would be lucky. Making a rope for the goat from the thick string that I always carried, I led the animal home to my garden where I left him. I immediately set off for the beach. I was happy to be home again, and I began to make a cage for my parrot. After a week, I went to my garden again to take care of my goat. I was horrified when I saw him almost dead. He was so hungry. I had thought there was enough to eat in my garden for him, but perhaps he did not like any of the fruits. I gave him something to eat, and when I began to walk home, he followed me like a dog. From then on, he almost never let me out of his sight. It would be many years before I had many goats. Soon after this, it was the day of September 30th again. Now I had been on the island for 2 years. I had never seen another ship in the water. The hope and idea that I might be rescued grew less and less each day. The years passed. I dried my grapes and planted more corn and wheat. I worked in my garden and hunted for food. I began a project that would keep me busy for many months, digging the inside of a tree trunk to make a wooden canoe. Because I had been on the island for some years, my clothes had begun to rot. The clothes of my long-dead friends had kept me warm for a long time. When these clothes also became useless, I made myself a suit and cap from goat skins. I spent some time making an umbrella. This would protect me from the sun when I was walking along the beach. I had fun trying to teach Polly, my parrot, to speak. Perhaps she did not like me because she would never say one word. It took me 6 years on the island to make a good canoe. Finally, I was ready to travel around in the water. I fitted it with a sail, loaded it with supplies, and began to sail around the island. The first time I went to sea in my canoe, the strong water currents took me very far away from the island. I had to work very hard to get the boat back to my beach. The second time I went out, I had studied the water currents, so I knew how to travel through the water. When I returned to the island, I took the canoe to a small inlet and tied up my boat. Then, with my umbrella covering my face from the sun, I walked along the beach towards home. I was happy to reach my garden early in the evening. Tired by my adventure in the canoe, I lay down under the trees and fell asleep. When I woke up, I heard someone calling my name. Over and over I heard,
Robin Crusoe, poor Robin Crusoe, where are you, Robin Crusoe?
Chapter 9. A Footprint in the Sand. I looked around me, but I did not see anyone. My heart was pounding. Could it be, after all these years, someone had found me? A few seconds later, I heard the voice again. It was then that I realized that it was Polly the parrot. All the time I had spent teaching her to talk had been successful. I burst out laughing. I decided that I did not want to travel any more for some time. I wanted to have my boat with me, but it had taken so long to make it, and sailing was difficult. So I decided that it could stay where it was. I still did not have any cooking pots, so I decided to improve my building skills and make some. It took me a very long time, but I figured out how to make things with wet clay. From this clay, I was able to make myself a pipe and some cooking pots. I also made more baskets. I became very good at this. More years passed. By the time I had been on the island for 10 years, I could do many things. I could build things from wood, I could make pots, and very beautiful baskets. My mother would have been proud of me. By now, my supply of gunpowder and bullets was very small. I started to think about how I would go hunting when I could not use my guns anymore. I decided to make some goat traps. These worked very well. One morning I found a mother goat and her children in one of the traps. There were 2 little females and a male. I let the mother goat go, and after I had tied the 3 little ones together, I led them home. I began to build a fenced-in area for them in an open field. This area had enough grass and water to keep them happy. When I was done with the fence, I set my 3 goats free in it. Within a year, I had 12 goats, and a year later, I had 33 of them. They certainly liked to have babies. Now I had goat's meat to eat and their milk to drink. I taught myself how to make butter and cheese from this milk as well. Sometimes, when I ate, I imagined myself the king of the island, sitting with my animal friends, Polly, my old dog, and 2 cats who had come to live with me. But I certainly don't look like a king, I said to myself one day. I looked like a wild man in my goatskin clothes. My crown was a large goatskin cap. My robes were a goatskin jacket that reached to the middle of my legs. I was wearing goatskin pants and pieces of goatskin wrapped round my feet for shoes. I probably looked like a goat. I had a belt around my waist. On this belt were a saw and a hatchet for cutting down trees. I had a place to carry 2 pouches, one for my gunpowder and another for my bullets. I had a basket, a gun, and an umbrella with me to protect me from the sun. I had been walking along the beach, but suddenly I stopped. There was a footprint in the sand. I looked all around, but I saw no one. I ran up and down the beach, shouting, "Hello! Hello!" but no one answered. I wondered if the footprint belonged to someone friendly. It would be pleasant to talk to another man after so many years. But then I thought it might be a savage's footprint. This scared me terribly. I ran back to my house quickly and gathered my guns. I did not sleep at all that night. I thought I would be attacked by terrible people at any second. I had all kinds of crazy ideas about the footprint. Maybe it was the devil trying to trick me. Maybe God put the footprint there to scare me as a punishment for all the things I did wrong. When I calmed down, I decided that the footprint was made by a person. He had taken a canoe from the nearby land, and the wind must have blown him to my island. For the next day I did not leave the house, but I had to go outside when my food and water ran out. Very soon I felt normal again. I laughed at my fears. There had been no one but me on the island for more than 10 years. Why would someone come here now? While I was milking my goats, I had the idea that the footprint was mine. The more I thought of it, the more I believed that this was true. I walked back to the footprint, sure that I was right. But then I saw that the footprint was bigger than my own foot. Someone had been here then. It was almost impossible for me to believe that, after so many years, someone had visited the island or was living on it. I did not understand what had happened, so I tried to forget about it. Soon things returned to normal. I lived my life with almost the same freedom as before. But one day, I was looking out at the ocean from the top of a hill. I saw a little boat leaving the island. I waited until it had disappeared. Then I ran to the part of the island where the boat had left from. When I reached the beach, I saw a horrible sight. The ground was covered with human bones. They were in a huge hole in the ground. The remains of a large fire were next to the bones. I realized immediately what had happened. Whoever had made the fire had cooked and eaten those people. My island had been visited by cannibals, men who liked to eat other men. From that day on, I went to my house and my garden, but nowhere else. I always had guns with me. I did not shoot the guns too often, in case the savages might hear the sound. Luckily, I had plenty of goats to eat, so I no longer needed to hunt in the forest. The thought of people eating other people made me angry. I decided to try to catch the savages and save their prisoners if I could. My chance to do this came 18 months later. One morning I saw 5 canoes on the beach near my house. When I climbed to the top of a tree to get a better view, I saw 30 naked men dancing around a fire a little distance from the boats. Keeping still so they would not see me, I saw them take 2 prisoners out of the canoes. As soon as they were on the beach, one of the savages hit one of the prisoners with a large, thick stick. As soon as he was on the ground, the savages ran to him and started to cut the meat from his bones. They threw the meat on the fire, laughing. The man's screams were horrible to hear. Even now I shake when I think about them. While the savages killed this man, the other victim was left standing alone. Clearly, he saw his chance to escape, because he ran along the beach towards me. I knew then that I had to save the poor man's life. By now, 2 of the savages were chasing the man. I jumped out of the tree and picked up my guns. I ran just to the edge of the trees where they met the beach. Now, the running man and the savages who were chasing him were far from the others. I was close to the prisoner. I called to the prisoner and told him to come to me very quickly. When the savages saw me, they stopped in surprise. Quickly, I hit the first savage with my large gun, and he fell to the ground. The other savage took a bow and arrow from his shoulders and pointed it at me. But one shot from my gun killed him instantly. By this time, the prisoner was by my side. He stared in amazement at my gun. I saw that he did not know how this thing could have killed a man so easily. He fell to his knees and kissed my feet. Then he picked up my right foot and put it on his head. I thought he was trying to say, "I am your slave forever." He stood up, and we went towards the man whom I had hit with my gun. As we came near, I raised my gun, but the man suddenly pointed to my large knife, then to himself. Immediately I understood what he wanted. I gave it to him, and watched as with one quick, strong movement he cut the savage's head off. He picked the head up by the hair and laid it at my feet along with the sword. I pointed in the direction of my house and motioned for him to go with me. But the prisoner first pointed to the 2 dead bodies on the ground, and then to the place where the other savages were still dancing around the fire. Clearly, they did not know what had happened. I understood that the prisoner wanted to bury the bodies so that the other man-eating savages would not find them. I nodded, and he began to work. When he was done, he followed me to my house. The house was so well hidden by bushes and trees that the savages would never find us there. The prisoner was a good-looking man with strong, straight arms and legs. He was tall and very strong. He seemed young, about 26 years old. I knew he must be hungry, so I gave him some milk and showed him how to drink it. Then I taught him how to dip pieces of bread in the milk. If the man was going to live with me, he had to have a name, of course. I named him Friday, which was the day of the week that day. Then I taught him my name, which was to be Master. I kept him with me all that night. After so many years alone, it was very nice to have some company. even if he could not speak to me. The next morning we went to see if the savages had left the island. The beach looked terrible. The sand was covered with human bones, and it was colored red with blood. When we were sure the savages had gone, I got Friday to gather all the remains of the human bodies together. When that was done, we lit a fire and burned them all to ashes. We went back to my home. I gave my man Friday some clothes, for he only had a cloth around his waist. Then I began to make him a goatskin coat and a hat made of rabbit skin. The next thing to be done was to decide where he was to live. He could not stay in my house with me. If he was going to be my servant, he could not live so close to his master. So I built him a tent next to my house, and he seemed to like this very much. Chapter 10. Friday's New Life. Now that there were 2 of us on the island, I had to grow enough corn to feed us both. To do this, I needed more ground to plant seeds in. I chose a place and showed Friday how to get the ground ready for planting. He began to work very happily. When the ground was cleared, we put up a fence around it. That was my happiest time on the island. Friday was an honest, loyal, and loving servant. He did everything that I asked him to do. When he learned some English, we would talk together at night. I taught Friday how to shoot a gun. He became very good at this. I taught him how to milk the goats and make butter and cheese. I showed him how to make baskets. Actually, I taught him everything that I had to learn for myself. Soon he was as good at these things as I was. I told him the story of how I got to the island. He wanted to see the pieces of the old ship, so we walked down to the beach. These pieces still lay where they had been washed onto the beach long ago. When he saw the old ship, he said, "Me see this kind of boat. It came to my country." At first I did not understand this, but as we talked, I learned that some years ago a ship had crashed into the rocks near the mainland, which was close to the island. Friday and his people had rescued 17 white men from this ship. "What did you do with them?" I asked. "They live. They dwell at my nation," Friday said. It turned out that for 4 years the white men had lived with Friday's people. "Your people don't eat these men?" I asked. "No, my people not eat other men. Only bad savages do that," Friday said. "My people make white men their brothers." Not long after that day, we were standing on the top of a hill. Suddenly, Friday looked out to sea and said, "Oh, I happy. There see my country, my nation." He sounded very happy to see his own country again. I took him to the other side of the island, where I kept the canoe I had made before he came. "Is this boat big enough to take us to your country?" I asked. Friday shook his head. A few days later, I took him to the place where, years before, I had made a boat that was too big and heavy to get into the water. The old pieces of that boat were still there. I asked Friday if this kind of boat would be big enough to take us. He nodded. "Would carry enough food, drink, other things," he said. "All right," I said. "Let's start building another one." Friday found a good tree and began to chop it down. After I showed him how to use an axe, he completed the job very well. When the inside of the boat was finished, we pushed it into the water. That job took us almost 2 weeks because the boat was so heavy. Then I put a very tall, thin tree on the boat for the mast. Then I made a sail from old pieces of cloth. While I made these things, Friday made a fence around the boat in the shallow water to keep too much water from coming in. We made a dock so that we could tie the boat up. Next, we covered the boat with tree branches to keep the rain off. Now there was nothing more to be done but to wait for November and December. I thought that if we went to sea during these months, the weather would be good, so we could reach Friday's country. Chapter 11. More people come to the island. We began to get ready for our journey, gathering food and supplies. One day I sent Friday to the beach to find a turtle for us to eat. Almost immediately he came running back to the house. He almost flew over the fence, he was so excited. "Oh, master," he cried, "out there! 1, 2, 3 boats!" "Well, Friday, we may have to fight a battle if these people are not friendly," I said. I gave him a drink of rum to calm him down. We went up the hill and looked out onto the beach. We were careful not to be seen. This was good because more savages had come. There were many more than last time. I counted 21 savages and 3 prisoners. We ran back to the house to get some guns. I put a small bottle of rum in my pocket and gave Friday some bullets and powder to shoot the guns with. We ran into the woods with these things. Quietly, we walked as close to the beach as possible without being seen by the savages. After a few minutes, I told Friday to hide behind a large tree and tell me what he saw. When he came back, he was very excited. "Master," he said, "2 prisoner dead. Other man I know. He comes live with us. He is white man." We watched the savages sitting on the beach. 2 of them got up and went to kill the white man who was still alive. If we wanted to save him, we had to hurry. We fired our guns at the savages. Friday killed 2 and hurt 3 more. I killed 1 and hurt 2. The second time we shot at the savages, we killed only 2, but the rest were frightened and ran around screaming and yelling to each other. "Now, Friday, start running," I whispered. Quickly, we ran out of the woods towards the prisoner. Now, some of the savages had run into the water and gotten into their little boats. While I cut the prisoner's ropes, Friday shot at the savages in their little boats. Again, he killed 2 of them. I was not sure what language the man spoke, but I decided to try Portuguese. "Who are you?" I asked him. "I'm a Catholic," he answered in the Latin language. His voice was so weak that I could hardly hear him. It was a good thing I had brought some rum. I pulled it from my pocket and gave it to him. "Where are you from?" I asked as he drank the rum. "I am from Spain," he replied. His voice was a little louder now. "I know you are very tired and weak," I said, "but you must help us fight these savages." Without waiting for his answer, I gave the man a gun. The man was a very skilled fighter, even though he was weak. He ran towards the savages, and within a few seconds 2 more were dead. While I was putting bullets in a new gun, I watched the Spaniard fight with a large savage. It looked as if the savage would beat him to the ground. But then the Spaniard took out his gun and shot the man in the chest. Meanwhile, Friday had killed another 3 of the savages with his axe. The Spaniard's gun had run out of bullets, so he came to me to get another one. When I gave him another gun, he ran after 2 savages and shot them both with his gun. He only hurt them, so they ran into the woods. But a moment later, one of them ran out with Friday chasing him. "One is dead," Friday said. But before he could kill the second man, the savage ran into the sea and swam out to one of the boats. Now, the only savages left alive were in their boats and trying to get away. One of the savages' boats was left in the water. I ran into the water and swam to the boat. Friday followed me. When I jumped into it, I saw another prisoner in the boat. He was lying on the bottom, all tied up. He was an older man than I, tall and dark, and looked like a savage himself. I cut the poor man's ropes to let him go. I was giving him some rum to drink when Friday climbed into the boat. Then I stared in amazement, because when Friday saw the prisoner, he gave a great cry of surprise and threw his arms around the man. It was a few moments before Friday could speak, but then he told me that this man was his father. I told Friday to go back to the beach. The Spanish man was lying on the ground, very tired from the fighting. Then I returned to the beach to get the guns and swords, rowing the canoe with Friday's father in it. When I got to the beach, Friday ran towards me. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I go get more boat. Savage men left in water," he said. Friday's father and the Spanish man were lying on the sand. They were too weak to walk to my house, so Friday and I carried them up the hill on our backs. This was hard work, because Friday and I were also tired. I decided that my guests should stay outside the house, because they needed fresh air and sun. So I made a tent for them outside the fence to my house. It was near a group of trees that I had planted some years ago. When I had put some blankets and straw inside the tent, the two men liked it very much. There were now 3 other men on the island with me. They were very grateful to me for saving their lives. Each of us believed in different religions. I laughed when I thought about this. I was a Protestant Christian. Friday and his father were pagans, although I had also taught Friday about Christianity, and the Spaniard was a Catholic. My kingdom was very small to have all these different beliefs. Chapter 12. Making Plans. After I had finished making my guests comfortable, I thought they must be hungry. I sent Friday to kill a nice young goat. When he had done this, I took the goat's skin off and then cut the meat into pieces. I gave one of the pieces to Friday and asked him to boil it and make a soup for our guests. When the soup was hot, I added some barley and rice to it. When the meal was cooked, I told Friday to bring a small table for us to eat on. When Friday had brought the table and set the stew upon it, I called his father and the Spaniard from their tent where they were asleep. Friday and I decided to eat with them to cheer them up. I thought they might be frightened at being far from their countries. Friday was my translator, so I could ask his father questions. The Spaniard spoke the language of Friday's people very well. As Friday had told me, he was one of the white men who had lived with Friday's people. "Do you think your enemies will return to this island?" I asked Friday's father. The old savage shook his head. "They have never seen these guns before. You killed many of them with your magic very quickly. They are so scared of you that they will not dare to come back here. And if they do come back," I thought, "now that there are 4 of us, we will be able to fight many of them." When the meal was finished, I told Friday to return to the beach and gather any guns we might have left there. I also told him to bury the dead savages. As the days passed, the Spanish man became my friend. He told me that there were 16 other Spaniards living with Friday's people in their country. These men wanted to leave and sail to America. "Well," I said to him, "now that there are 4 of us, we could build a big, strong boat that could take us to America. But can these men be trusted?" I asked. "Don't worry," the Spaniard told me. "I'll make all of them promise to help you and be loyal to you before we leave for America. If any man does not, he'll be sorry." So I decided we should build a large boat. As we walked through the woods, I decided which trees should be cut into pieces. We wanted to build a boat large enough to hold many people. I made Friday and his father work, chopping down the trees. I showed the Spaniard some very large pieces of wood that I had taken from trees myself many years before when I was alone. "We'll need many pieces like these for a strong boat," I said, pointing to one very large piece. It was 35 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 4 inches thick. "When do you want to sail?" he asked me. "As soon as the boat is ready," I said. I wanted to leave in a few weeks, but he told me that we should wait for at least 6 months. "Many men will be on the boat. We will need to have plenty of food to give them on the long journey to America," he said. He was right. If the new ship was to carry 20 people, we would need much more food than I now had stored away. The first thing we had to do was catch more goats. We would need a lot of meat, cheese, milk, and butter. So I sent Friday and the Spaniard out to catch as many baby goats as they could. If the goats were babies, they would be friendlier. Fortunately, I had many grapes in my garden at this time of year. I told Friday and his father to pick as many grapes as they could and hang them in the sun. By the time the grapes had dried, we had enough raisins for a year. Next, we cut down the corn and rice plants and gathered all the grain. By the time we had finished, we had plenty of corn and rice to feed all the people in our boat. Then we made many baskets to keep our grain in. Friday and the Spaniard were both very good at this, because I had taught them how to do it. When all these things were done, it was time to go and get the other Spaniards on the mainland. I decided to send Friday's father and the Spaniard to the mainland first. This was because both of them spoke the language of Friday's people, and the Spaniard could talk to his men. Before they left, I told the Spaniard to tell his people that if they wanted to come with us, they must promise never to attack Friday or me. They also had to be loyal to me. They left in one of the canoes that had belonged to the savages. They both had many guns with them. "Only shoot the guns in an emergency," I said. In my years on the island, I had learned to make supplies last for a long time, but we had to save the gunpowder and bullets. I gave them enough bread, dried meat, and dried grapes to feed them and the men they took with them. I gave them much more food than they needed. Friday's father and the Spaniard left for the mainland on the 26th of October. We decided that when they got close to the island, they would make a signal in the water to tell us they had come back. Then they began to sail. Friday and I watched until we could hardly see their canoe. Then we went back to my house. Chapter 13. An Unexpected Event. 8 days later, an extremely strange thing happened. In the morning, I woke up to hear Friday shouting, "Master! Master! They have come! They have come!" I jumped up and ran through the trees to a place where I could see the ocean. I suddenly realized I had left my house without a gun. This was strange because I do not remember the last time I had left home without a gun. When I looked out to sea, I saw a large boat sailing towards the shore. The boat was not coming from the direction of Friday's country. It seemed to have come from the southern point of the island. I called Friday over and told him to hide. I was sure this could not be Friday's father and the Spaniard. I ran to the top of the hill to get a better view. When I reached the top of the hill, I saw an even bigger ship sitting in the water. Because of their shapes, I knew both of these boats were English boats. I did not know what to think or do. The idea that English people were nearby made me happy, but I wanted to be careful. Why would an English ship sail into this area? This is not their territory, I thought. England did not trade with people in this part of the world. If any ship was to sail into this area, I thought it should be a Spanish or Portuguese ship. I said to myself, perhaps the ship is lost. But then I realized that there had been no storm. I decided that whether the ship was English or not, we should not go and welcome the people. We should wait and see what happened, because there might be some danger for us. The crew was clearly looking for a good place to land. I was sure they thought that no one lived on this island. Finally, they landed their boat about half a mile from where I was. 11 men came onto the beach. From their faces, clothes, and hair, I saw that they were Englishmen. 3 of the men were tied up clearly. They were prisoners. As we watched, we saw that one of the prisoners seemed to be asking the leader for something. Friday said, "Master, white men also eat prisoners like savages?" "No," I said. "I think that they will kill the prisoners, but I am sure they will not eat them." Worried, I watched as one of the men raised his sword. I thought he would kill the prisoners at that moment. But he seemed to want only to scare his prisoners with the sword, not to kill them, at least for that time. After a few minutes, they let the prisoners go. It was amazing that the men did not try to run away. When the other people left to explore the island, the prisoners just sat on the beach and looked around them. These 3 prisoners looked terribly scared. The looks on their faces reminded me of my first day on the island, when I had been sure I was going to die. Friday and I stayed where we were. We watched the water go out with the tide. When the water went out, the boat was left sitting on soft sand. Then the men returned from their exploring. One of the men called out a name, and a moment later 2 men stood up in the boat. I could see that they were holding bottles, so they must have been drinking liquor. I saw also that from the way they were standing, they had been drinking too much of it. "You stupid fools!" the men shouted, running across the beach to the boat. "I told you to watch the boat!" Then the men tried to push the boat back into the water. "Leave the ship alone, Jack," one of the drunk men said, laughing. "It will float when the water comes back." While all this was happening, Friday and I had not moved at all. From my experience, I knew we had 10 hours until the tide of water came back in. Quietly, I told Friday to follow me back to the house. We were careful not to let the men on the beach see us. As we came near to the house, I was happy that it was so well hidden. The trees and bushes had grown around it for 25 years. When we got to the house, we got some guns and went back to our place on the hill to watch the men. I wanted to try to save the prisoners. They were Englishmen, and I did not want anything to happen to them. When we looked down at the beach again, I saw that the leaders were asleep. They were probably drunk, and not used to the heat on the island. Their 3 prisoners were sitting quietly under a tree nearby. Now was our chance to save them. Quickly and quietly, we walked over to the prisoners. Friday and I must have looked very strange with our goatskin clothing and all our weapons. I did not know what they would think of us. "Hello!" I called softly. The 3 men turned around, looking amazed when they saw me. "Don't be afraid, gentlemen," I said. "I am a friend." Chapter 14. We Fight a Battle. "Did he come from heaven?" one of the prisoners whispered to another. "All true help comes from heaven," I said. One of the men looked at me and said, "Are you really going to help us? Is this a sign from God? Are you a real man or an angel?" I smiled. "I think if God had sent an angel to help you, he would not be dressed in animal skins. And would a real angel need guns?" The men began to look less frightened. "No, gentlemen, I am an Englishman like you," I said. "I have lived on this island for many years. My servant and I have come to help you." "Do you see that ship there?" one of the men said. He pointed out to sea at the large ship. I nodded. "I am the ship's captain, or I was, until my men got angry and decided to fight against me." He looked at the other men with him. "This is my friend, and this is a passenger we had on the ship. My men told me they were going to kill us. But then they saw this island, and they decided it would be fun to leave us here to die slowly. They thought no one lived here. Well, they were wrong, and they will be sorry for it," I said. "Are they all asleep?" "Yes, they drank too much," the captain's friend said. "But speak softly, sir. If they wake up and see you here, they will kill us all." "Do they have guns?" I asked. "They have 2 guns, that is all," the captain said. He looked at the many guns and knives Friday and I had with us. "Well then," I said, "do not worry. If they are drunk and sleeping, it will be easy to kill them, or we could take them for prisoners," I said, taking out my knife. "Wait, sir. They don't all deserve to die," said the captain. "The 2 leaders, the ones who do not like me, are terrible men. They told everyone else to disobey me. But I think the others would return to their duties if these 2 were gone." "Which 2 men are they?" I asked, looking at the sleeping men. They were lying on the beach like dead people. "I can't see them from here," the captain said. "Well then," I said, "we will go into the woods and make a plan so they don't hear us." When we had gone into the woods, I said to the captain, "I will help you if you do 2 things for me." "We'll do anything you want," said the captain. "You can become our leader, and we will sail to any part of the world you want to see." "Yes, certainly," said the 2 other men. "That is exactly what I want," I said. "While you are on this island, I am the leader. I have lived here for more than 25 years, and I know how to handle these men. You must do what I tell you, but if I need to, I will ask your opinions." They all nodded. "The second thing I ask is, if I help you rescue your ship, you must take me and my servant back to England." Again, they all said yes. "If we can rescue our ship, sir," said the captain, "we will owe you our lives." I gave him and his companion some guns to shoot. We all went back to the beach where the men lay sleeping. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "Well, sir, I think you should be the leader here. Maybe you should decide what is best, but I don't want to kill anyone without good reason," said the captain. "However, I did tell you that the 2 men who tied us up are very terrible men." Just then 2 of the men stood up. "Are those the men, the 2 bad ones?" I asked. The captain said no. "Captain, I don't care if these men are not so bad. We cannot let them get away. If they do, they will help the leaders to escape also." "Do you want that to happen?" I said. The captain was about to shoot them when suddenly the captain's friend and the passenger shot their guns. One of the men fell dead, and the other was very hurt. The captain walked over to where the hurt man stood, holding his side. "It's too late to cry for help now," he said. He hit him so hard that the man must have died immediately. By this time, 3 of the other men had woken up. When they saw their dead friends, they begged us not to hurt them. "We'll do anything you want. Please don't kill us," one of the men cried. "We'll help you get the ship back," said another. The captain looked at me. "I will let you decide what to do," I said to the captain. "But if you let them live, their hands and feet will be tied while they are on my island." While the captain and I tied up the men, Friday and the captain's friend got the smaller boat and the oars. Now the other men had woken up and ran over to us. When they saw the 2 dead bodies and the other men all tied up, they immediately surrendered to us. Now we could get the ship back. Our victory was complete. Finally, the captain was able to ask me how I came to the island. He listened with amazement as I told him my story. I told him how I had learned to find and grow food, build a home, and make clothes and tools. The captain could not believe I had done all this. "Sir, you are a truly wonderful man," is all he could say. After I finished my story, I took the captain and his friend to my house, where I gave them something to eat and drink. These men were very interested in my house and how I had so cleverly made it and hidden it in the trees. Over time, the trees I had planted had grown and become a little forest. I had cut a path through this forest that led to my house. "I also have a garden where I spend time," I told the captain. When I described it to him, he said, "This sounds like a beautiful paradise, sir. I must see it." "Of course we can go and see the garden, but first we must get your ship back," I said. "I think it is impossible," he said sadly. "Nothing is impossible," I said. "There are still 26 men on the ship," he said. "They fought against me, and they will not let us sail to England or America. In those countries they would be killed like the criminals they are." Chapter 15. My Big Plan. I sat and thought for some time. I wanted to trick the men on the ship into a trap. I wanted to stop them from taking and killing us all. Suddenly I thought that when their friends on the beach did not return, they would send a boat to the island to see what had happened. When I told the captain my thoughts, he agreed with me. "So, Captain," I said, "we must hide the boat Friday and your friend tied up, so they don't see it. We should take anything inside that boat with us." We ran back to the beach. When we reached the boat, we took all the guns and supplies we found in it. Everything was very useful to me, especially some brandy and pieces of sugar that we found. I had not tasted these things in many years. When all these things had been hidden away, we made a very large hole in the bottom of the boat. When the men from the ship came to the island, they could not take it back with them. Then we could use it later. Truthfully, it did seem impossible for us to rescue his ship from so many men. But I would never tell the captain that. At least, we could easily fix the boat with the hole and sail it to the Leeward Islands. On the way there, we could pick up Friday's father and all the Spanish men. They were probably all in Friday's country by now. While we were working on the beach, we heard a gun being fired from the ship. When we turned around, we saw a flag waving in the wind. The captain said that the flag was a sign for the men who had taken the captain and his friends to the island. They were supposed to return to the ship now. Soon, we saw another little boat being put into the water. Because the men did not answer the signal, some of the others were coming to see what was wrong. We ran and hid in the forest. When the boat came close, we saw that there were men in the boat. They were strong-looking and had many guns. "I think that a few of the men were forced to disobey me," the captain said, looking at the boat. "But all the rest are guilty." He looked very serious. "I don't think we can beat them." I smiled at him. "What are you so afraid of? Earlier you thought you were going to die, but then I came along and saved you. Anything can happen. You have nothing to lose by trying to fight them. On our side of the battle, we had almost as many men as they did. We had 7 men, and they had 10. There were me, Friday, the captain, his friend, the passenger, and 2 others we had caught. The captain was sure the 2 men would help us. The captain told me that Friday had taken 3 of the other men we caught to my house. These were very bad men with cruel hearts. They could not be allowed to escape. Friday had tied them up, but had left food and drink for them. Friday told them that if they were quiet, we would let them go in a day or 2. But if they tried to escape, we would kill them immediately. All the rest of the men were tied up in my garden. I thought we should keep our prisoners in different places. Finally, the men from the ship arrived at the beach and pulled their boat onto the sand. They left no one watching their boat, which made me excited. The men from the ship ran to the boat with the hole in it. From where we were hiding, we could hear them asking why the boat had a hole. Then they called their friends' names. When no one answered them, they started shooting their guns in the air. I am sure that the prisoners in my house must have heard these guns, but Friday scared them so much that they did not answer their friends. A minute or 2 later, this group of men got back in their boat and went back to the large ship in the water. I am sure they thought that everyone had been killed mysteriously. After a while, 7 of the men came back to the beach. They left 3 waiting in the boat. This was a problem. Even if we were able to beat the 7 men, the other 3 could return to the ship. We watched the 7 as they quickly walked along the beach and climbed the hill, calling for their friends. The captain said to me, "We can attack them when they are about to add more powder to their guns." "That's a good idea," I said. But no one shot again, so I was not sure what to do. Suddenly I had an idea. I told Friday and the captain's friend to go to a place near where I had first met Friday many years ago. "When you get there," I said, "start shouting. When the men answer you, run further into the woods. Then shout again and again. They will think you are their friends and follow you into the forest and away from the beach." Friday and the captain's friend ran off. Soon I heard Friday and the man shouting. The 3 men that had waited in the boat took the boat onto the beach. One of the men said to the others, "Stay here," and ran along the beach calling for his friends. We watched the man getting smaller and smaller as Friday's calls drew them into the forest. Quickly, we caught the 2 men who were still waiting. They did not give us any trouble. Then we sat down to wait. Chapter 16. Leaving the Island. When Friday and the captain's friend came back, it was night-time. We saw all the men who had been searching return from the forest and walk along the beach in the moonlight. The men who were behind shouted to those in front to wait for them, because they were weak and tired. When they came to the boat, they saw that their 2 friends were gone. They began to call for them. "This island is magic," cried one. "Or it's haunted by ghosts," cried another. "Let's attack now," Friday said to me. "No, we should wait," I said. "We don't want to kill them all, and I don't want any of our men to be hurt." Let's see if they separate again." But it became clear that they wanted to stay close together. I told Friday and the captain to go forward as close as they could without being seen. They did this and then began to shoot. The leader of the rebel men fell down dead. One of the others fell to the ground. He was seriously hurt, and he died several hours later. The third man ran for his life. We all ran forward to join Friday, and we came close to the group of men. In the dark, the rebel men did not know how many men were in our group. I told one of the men to call out to the rebels and tell them to give up the fight. "Hey you, Tom Smith," he called. "Is that you, Robinson?" the man called Smith called back. "What do you know? There was another Robinson on the island now." "Yes, it's me. Put down your guns and give up, or else you are all dead men." "Who are you with?" "Why should we give up to you?" said Tom Smith. "I am with many men. Here is our captain, and some other men who have been hunting you. Your leader is dead. Give up, or you'll be killed." "Will you hurt us?" shouted Smith. "Do you know who I am?" called the captain. "Yes. If your men put down their guns, we will not hurt them. I will only punish Will Atkins." The captain had told me that Will Atkins was the first man to fight against him, when the men had rebelled. He was the man who had first scared the captain, when I first saw them all on the island. "Please, Captain," cried Atkins, "don't kill me." "Put down your guns. This island has a governor, and perhaps he will not hurt you," the captain shouted. He meant that I was the governor. "Very well," said Smith. "Throw down your guns, men." When we were sure that the men had given up the fight, the captain went to talk to them. I decided to stay out of sight. I thought, what governor would dress in goat skins? I heard the captain tell the men that they were wrong to think that no one lived on the island. "The island is ruled by an Englishman," he said. "He could kill you all, but he has promised that you shall be saved as long as you are on his island. All except you, Will Atkins. You will be killed in the morning." "What about the rest of us?" someone asked. "You'll be taken back to England and be punished for your crimes there," said the captain. From my hiding place, I saw Atkins fall to his knees and beg the captain to save him. A moment later, the rest of the men also asked not to be sent back to England. They knew that they would die if they went back there. "We promise to be loyal to you. We'll do anything you say," one of them said, and everyone else cried out, "Yes." "Captain," I called, "the governor wants to speak to you." "Tell him that I am just coming," he replied. He turned to the men and said, "Don't try anything. Remember, you're surrounded." When he was with me, I told the captain that it would be easy for us to take back his ship. But first, we had to solve the problem of Will Atkins. "Captain, tell Friday to take Will Atkins to my house. Tie him up with the other prisoners who are already there. Then help him lead everyone else to the garden. Friday will watch all these men in the garden until morning." When morning came, I took the captain to the garden and hid myself while he talked to the men. "If all you men help me to get back my ship," I heard him say, "the governor has promised me that he will ask for your freedom when we return to England. If you don't help me, he will leave you to die in chains when you reach England." The men told the captain that they would help us. So we fixed the boat with a hole in it. It was some time later when the two boats left the beach, traveling towards the large ship. The captain, his friend, and 5 men were in the first boat. The passenger was in the second boat. I forgot his name, but the captain had made him the leader of some of the men. Friday and I also stayed behind to make sure that the prisoners caused no trouble. Later, I heard how the captain and his men got back the ship. As soon as they got near the ship, the captain told the other Robinson to tell the men who were still on the ship that everyone had returned from the island. When the two boats were next to the ship, the captain and his friend climbed onto the ship. Before anyone could stop them, they hit two of the men and knocked them out. Quickly, the rest of the men in the little boats got onto the ship and controlled all the men on the deck. There was one man on the ship who had made himself the new captain. When he saw what was happening, this man locked himself in a room with some other people. The door was quickly broken down, but when the real captain and his friend went in, the men inside shot them. They hurt the captain's friend, but not very badly. Although he was hurt, the captain's friend shot at the false captain. He killed him immediately. There was blood all over the room. When they saw their leader was dead, everyone else on the ship gave up the fight. Everyone begged the captain not to kill or punish them. As soon as the ship was his, the captain asked that 7 guns be fired. This was the signal of success that I was waiting for. I was so exhausted that I lay down and fell asleep. I did not move until I heard the captain's voice calling, "Governor!" "My dear friend and rescuer," he said when I was awake, "there is your ship, for she is all yours, and so are we who belong to her." I looked out to sea and saw the large, beautiful ship. It was about half a mile from the place where I had first arrived on the island so many years ago. After all this time, my time on the island was over. A few moments later I burst into tears. When I had calmed down, the captain and I returned to the beach. One of the ship's little boats was waiting there. "Bring the gifts I brought for the governor onto the beach," he called. His men brought wonderful things. There were 6 large bottles of Madeira wine, 2 pounds of tobacco, 12 good pieces of ship's beef, 6 bottles of port wine, a bag full of lemons, and a bottle of lime cordial. Even better, he gave me clothes. I now had 6 new shirts, 2 pairs of gloves, a pair of shoes, a good hat, and a pair of stockings. Everything fit me perfectly. As you might imagine, these were wonderful gifts, but it was certainly strange to wear normal clothes after 25 years. "You look just like a governor now," the captain said when I was dressed. I smiled and bowed to him. Suddenly, I realized something. What shall we do with the prisoners who are still in my house? "Well, they are such bad men that if we take them with us, they must be put in chains all the time, and we must give them to the leaders of the first English colony we reach." "I'm sure they'll be killed," I said. "Yes, they will." The captain's voice was sad. He was really too kind, that man. "What if I tell them all they should stay here and live on this island?" The captain thought for a moment and then said yes. I told him to go back to his ship and hang the body of the dead leader of the rebels where it could be seen. Then he should bring the ship closer into shore. When that was done, I asked Friday to bring the prisoners in the house to me. When they were before me, I pointed to the ship. "Your captain has taken the ship, and you can see what he has done to the man who tried to fight him." They looked scared when they saw the dead body hanging from the ship. "Is there any reason why you should not die too?" I asked. When no one answered, I told them that I was going to leave the island with all my men. If we took them with us, the captain would have to keep them in chains all the way to England. There, they would be killed for their crimes. "But I think you should stay here," I said. "If you learn how to survive on the island, you can live here very well. This is your only chance for life," I continued. All the men wanted to stay on the island, so I asked the captain and his men to go back to the ship and to come back in the morning. "These prisoners won't dare to hurt me," I said to the captain. When the captain had gone, I told those prisoners my true story, that I was no governor, but only a sailor like them who had been on the island for many years. I showed them where my garden was, and taught them how to plant corn and harvest it, how to make bread, and how to dry grapes. I took them to my group of goats. I showed them how to get milk and make butter and cheese. And when it was time for me to go to the ship, I gave them guns, powder, and bullets. Just before I left, I told them that the Spaniards would probably come here. These were the men who Friday's father and the Spaniard had gone to the mainland to get. By the time I got to the ship, the water's tide had gone out, so we could not sail. We spent the night there. When we were about to leave the next morning, 2 of the men we left behind swam out to the ship. "The others will murder us if we stay there. Please let us come with you," they cried. The captain agreed to take them with us. As soon as they were on the ship, he had them whipped so well that they behaved wonderfully all the way home. Friday and I stood on the ship's deck and watched the island getting smaller and smaller as we sailed away from it. We both felt sad to leave the island because it had been home for so long. All I had with me, apart from my new clothes, were my large goatskin hat and Polly my parrot. She talked very well by now. And so, on December 19th, 1686, I left the island. I had been there for 28 years, 2 months and 19 days. And by the time Friday and I reached England, I had been gone for 35 years.